This is Season 6, Chapter 6 of The Tree of Life. In this episode, we will be talking about how both negatory structures and affirmational structures create expectations, or project future intentionality upon others. From the 9 dialogues of every intersections, we can see that 9 impulses are affirmed by those dialogues, which project future intentionality and action according to the expectations of the affirmational subject. This means that structures, insofar as they represent affirmational content with respect to a given set of impulses, project those impulses into the future as a species of self-consciousness. Which is to say that emotional continuity is preserved by the self-consciousnesses of those impulses, which represent nonlinear intersections with the actor according to a particular emotional expression. All of this is to say that substitution and displacement both play a role in emotional continuity. Once an impulse is affirmed by a person, subsequent nonlinear substitutions and displacements ensure the meeting of expectations according to that affirmational content. Which is to say that there will be nonlinear displacement events further to expression, as well as substitution events, archetypal convergence, further to emotional continuity. All of this is to say that imagine that your identity, in a state of negation, is fully plastic. Now, imagine that you react positively to some affirmational content. That impulse corresponding to that affirmational content is compelled by nonlinear displacement events further to expression of the impulse. Which is to say that there will be appropriation of the dialectical impulse, through displacement and substitution of that impulse by some other actor. Now, all of this is managed by a stable dyad of coupled, often lineal pairings. On the one hand, the archetypal individual maintains a parallel coupled state with the object, affirmed individual, through rationalization of the underlying impulses according to a common trait representation, reciprocation-mediated or oxytocin-mediated. On the other hand, the spatial non-consensual actor, dyad individual, maintains by virtue of that coupling a corresponding nonlinear displacement and substitution of him or herself for the social actor, further to appropriation of the dialectical impulse. Now, sublimation as a spatial non-consensual actor redirects those nonlinear displacement events outward instead of inward, directing that displacement into others instead of receiving it in the self, through the plate of the hands. But only in an archetypal consensual state can they also sublimate to the archetypal plate a symbolic plate, and thereby create a negatory structure. Or, loosen associations within the archetypal plate further to alteration of the affirmational structures of expression. In other words, in the absence of sublimation, our affirmational archetypal structure is created by our intersections with members of our archetypal constellation. Only through sublimation, either negatory or affirmational, is it possible to directly alter the structure, which determines whether we meet the expectations of others. In other words, when the displacement is directed outwardly, it results in expectation matching, the same way that when it is directly inward, it results in our meeting of others' expectations. All of this means that ordinarily our archetypal constellation generates our archetypal structure, or affirmational structure, and is indistinguishable from it. It is only through the act of sublimation that a structure becomes negatory or hybrid, through the relaxation or release of tension within the archetypal structure underlying our interactions with others. That's the end of the podcast for today.